Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Hire to Scale podcast. I am your host, JP Forno, and I'm very excited for today's episode because we get to talk to an absolute expert in the world of learning and development. Let me tell you a little bit more about today's guest. Michelle Braden is one of the most decorated learning and talent development leaders in the world, a certified executive coach and former chief learning officer with over 25 years of experience transforming how organizations grow their people. She has led global learning functions that supported tens of thousands of employees worldwide and has earned industry-leading recognition, including the 2023 CLO of the Year and multiple Brandon Hall Gold Awards for innovation in leadership development, blended learning, and onboarding impact. Michelle is known for designing talent strategies that deliver real business outcomes, from accelerating executive readiness to dramatically reducing ramp time for new hires. Today, she advises companies as an independent consultant, teaches business strategy for learning leaders, and co-hosts The Learning Imperative, a podcast where she explores how continuous learning drives organizational innovation. Today, we're going to cover a lot of topics, like a simple way of designing training so people actually remember and do the work right, a better way to coach so your team can solve problems on their own, how to use AI as a helper, not a crutch, how to build confidence fast so new hires can help right away, and how to grow thinkers and not just task doers. In other words, how to build a team that can do great work without holding their hand. I have learned a ton from Michelle over the years, and I know you will learn a lot from her in this episode. So without further ado, let's get on with the show. Michelle, thank you so much for being here. I'm excited about this conversation.
I've been looking forward to this for a while.
Yeah, I know I've been going back and forth for the past couple of weeks, but I just had to get you in here. I respect a lot your trajectory and your opinion. And when this idea of bringing the podcast to life came aboard, you were one of the first people I thought about. So thank you so much for making the time.
I appreciate that.
So I guess to start, maybe for people who don't know you, we could share a little bit about yourself and your background and what you're up to nowadays.
Well, actually, it might be boring to some people, but I retired officially from corporate life about a year ago. But I'm doing coaching, and I'm also working on boards and just different things like advising, consulting where I can. I'm trying not to work, if you my drift. I'm trying to scale it way back, because after 40 some years of working, I think I wasn't sure I was going to enjoy retirement, but I actually am enjoying it a lot because I love not having a boss, which is really fun. But I'm doing that. My career has spanned over 40 some years, starting in IT as a programmer, and then the last 10 plus years I was a chief learning officer, and that was really very rewarding to me. When I got into that, I really didn't know what I was doing, and learned a lot. Made a lot of mistakes, and this is where I am today.
You know what, when I joined learning, I came, I think, from a similar sort of trajectory. I wasn't in IT, but I was in sales before, and I know that you came from sales as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when we worked at the same BPO company, obviously I was many levels below your leadership, but I think that I did fall in love with the whole learning and development department. I think that for the type of business that we were in, it was the most engaging department, and the one that made sense to learn all these skills, because everybody should be focused on skill acquisition in their careers, and that's what we were providing as a department. But when I exit corporate, one of the things that I noticed is that in a lot of small businesses or growing businesses, there isn't a learning department. We don't place enough importance to learning as we perhaps might do finance or accounting or sales and marketing. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as to why do you think learning is such an important function to consider inside of your business? And why do you think it doesn't have the same level of, I guess, perceived importance for business owners in their companies?
Well, I would say, JP, I'm not sure that it's not important. Learning's not important, but I think the idea of having a learning department is not really one of the priorities in the smaller businesses. And maybe it's because just, resources and whatnot, they're focused on driving revenue or, providing customer service, et cetera, or building the product, whatever it is. And so I think with learning, it has to learning area department needs to grow as the company grows. But
Hmm.
sometimes if there's a focus on learning, it will help the company grow. But that doesn't mean that learning is not a priority, because I do think it's a key role for leaders. So if any founder, CEO, manager, it's a key role of theirs to provide learning to their teams. And they can do it in a lot of ways. I'm not saying they need to go become trainers, but at the same time, they need to be able to provide the resources, the mechanisms, maybe coaching, whatever it is, any kind of support for the team members so that the team members can grow their skills.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, a lot of people don't believe that's their role. And that's where I disagree.
How so? Why do you think it should be
Well,
wrong?
they think it's all incumbent upon the individual to figure out how to do stuff
Uh,
and or how to learn things. And here's the deal. So learning starts with what the strategy is for the company. So like, what's the business strategy? What are we all here to do? What's our focus? What's our mission? Where are we headed? Right? And when you start there, you look at what kind of roles or resources do we need to have in order to get there, to do that
hmm.
work for our customers, our suppliers, whoever it is. And then when you look at that, the roles, what do those roles need to be able to do? Like yeah, I have salespeople, but what do they need to be able to do? Can they just, like fill out an order form, or do they need to be able to go out and prospect? Do they need to do cold calls? Do they need to be able to close business on their own? What is it, the skill that they need to have? So there's like these business owners and business leaders, they know the strategy, and they have to kind of translate it into what are the key roles that I need to have in order to achieve that strategy. And then what are the key skills that the people in those roles need to have? And
Hmm.
then they have to provide ways for them to develop the skills or hire people with those skills. So, and then grow with them as the company grows. But a
Yeah.
lot of leaders, don't believe that's their role. They hire people, they just tell them what to do. That's it. And that's not the way it's gonna be successful.
Yeah, it's kind of like that 7 habits of highly effective people, beginning with that end in mind, reverse engineering from the business outcome. And it should be the first place that you look for who are you recruiting, to your point, and then the types of outputs that you're looking for them to do. I'm curious because you probably have seen a lot of different configurations of a learning function, maybe not a department per se, but a function within businesses, whether that's a small business or a large enterprise. How do you think learning is different in both of those contexts? And because I think that a lot of the information that's out there for people to like build learning around is like mimicking corporate, but that context might not be similar to a lot of people. So I guess like are those two dynamics different in a small business versus a large enterprise when it comes to a learning function?
Well, in a small business, there's more hands-on, more apprenticeship sort of learning, if you will, learning from the master, and more one-on-one coaching. I would say that when you get into the corporate business, what you're looking at is standardization. So, if we have a large corporation, we have a lot of different departments, we have a whole bunch of project managers all across the company. We want everyone to learn the same methodology of project management. That's
Mhm.
it. That would be in a corporate function of learning. So you'd have to have people that teach that, create the content if you can't buy it off the shelf, or customize it, and then teach it, and then support learners as they're going through the program. When it's smaller, it's a little bit more difficult to do because you have you're not standardizing across such a large group on the same type of skill. So in
Mhm.
a small company, you might have a lot of different skills that you're dealing with. And that's where the master apprenticeship sort of methodology works really well, where you might have a head of a department. They might have 5 people in the department. They teach the people in the department how to show this is how we do it here. And they let them try it, and they coach them on what they could do better next time, how they could do it a little bit differently, etc. They might send them off to formal education somewhere, but they're probably not going to have trainers on standby waiting to teach every single topic that they need to be taught because of
Mhm.
all the different skills. So, corporate training functions are really more around standardizing the training or the development for different skill sets. So you might have,
Mm-hmm.
skill sets for the IT group, skill sets for marketing, sales, etc. That's really the difference. And it is scalability, but it should be where, there's some mid-sized companies that might have a training department, but they have like 2 people. So they
Right.
have one person that's working with the business, trying to understand what do you need to learn? What are the people in your department need to be able to do? Let me get some resources for you. And then another person that's actually kind of deploying the resources, if you will. So like
Yeah.
either teaching or sending them training or whatever is required.
Yeah.
That's really the difference.
I think that what we saw is that even at one point, the standards are so clear that you could just have someone that hasn't even been that role, but they're just good at facilitation and they know how to communicate that standard in a way, but they don't even have to be that role in order to impart the knowledge for it. Whereas in a small business, like the subject matter expert is the facilitator. And it's a little bit more of like, how do we turn this tribal knowledge into standardized knowledge? But also like someone who is a subject matter expert in your small business might not have the skills to facilitate just yet. You just are very good at your job. And so like I think that upskilling of like, okay, how can we turn you into a trainer, not just a good operator or or somebody in fulfillment, right? Like how can we get you to a point where you can actually impart this knowledge and not just like, have the knowledge yourself.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and also not everyone's going to be a good facilitator or trainer. You know that, right?
right.
We've seen that happen. So I think if I go back to my early days of my career, I started as a programmer for a city government, and there were 3 of us in the programming department. We didn't have a training department, but when we had new software developed, I was the one who had this natural ability to explain, take a technical concept and break it down into simple terms to explain it to the end users. So this
Mhm.
is how you use this software function that we created, blah, blah, blah. And so that was noticed. So that it became where that's one of the things that I did. So in our department, when we had to impart knowledge to a group of users, it was Michelle that got to go do this. And you know what? I discovered I actually liked it because in IT, I kept getting promoted, but I was far away. Every time I got promoted, there were fewer and fewer people working around me. And I like people. So
Mhm.
I was sent off to go talk to the end users. And then that's how I got into my field. I think if you take that back to small companies, a lot of times there is somebody in that area that is just naturally like really good at explaining things and being empathetic and taking the time to ensure that the other people understand and helping them kind of work through, the problem solving and whatnot that needs to take place in order for them to really develop their skill in that area.
It's funny. I think that the one thing that I've been able to notice, like a litmus test, if you will, of how do you know if someone is good at explaining things, is having them explain a board game or like Monopoly, right? Like if somebody can explain the rules of Monopoly to me in a way that is clear, if I've never played it, then I know that you have an knack for explaining things. That's
That's
always
good.
been like a good test project, I guess. But I think that one of the things that I didn't run across when I was in corporate, but I do so a lot of times when I'm working with smaller medium enterprises, is that in corporate, to your point, when we were hiring and training for somebody for a role, in the majority of cases, there had already been a history of somebody else being that role. So we kind of had this like knowledge base. Or even if we wanted to bring on board someone like an executive level to teach us how to run like a new department like RPA or AI back in the day, right?
Okay.
Like we would bring a high level executive that can then build a department. But in a lot of cases, small businesses have to bring on board like middle managers, executors in a place that supplements the founder. And it, like, for example, if I'm really good at, I run a recruiting company for virtual assistants, right? So like, let's say I'm not that good at marketing. So I have to bring like a middle manager for marketing, but that's a role that nobody is doing right now. And I am not particularly good at. So how would I come about designing a training for someone that I don't have a lot of idea of how success should be either managed or trained in this area? I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just like training someone on things that I don't know about.
Well, sometimes, there is we have a lot of resources that you can do research in, right? And there's a lot of free learning out there. And so if you have an idea of if it's general skills, like if it's, even if it's a marketing role, there's a lot of content out in the cyberspace on how to create a marketing strategy. What are the key pieces of a marketing strategy, and et cetera, how to execute it. Where it gets tricky is on the specifics to the company. So it's like, this is what we do from marketing, right? And that's where if if you are in the company and you've been doing marketing, you know how the company does marketing. And so you can share that, kind of add that into, maybe customize what people are learning. But I think it's really pointing people to key resources. There's a lot of continuing education too to help people. I think there's a hesitancy though for employees to say, "Hey, I don't know this. Can I get some training on it? Can I go somewhere and learn this?" There's that hesitancy playing against the hesitancy of the leader who doesn't know what they don't know or what the person doesn't know to train them. So there's like this, you have this kind of conflict, if you will. So that's where I always say, go back to the skills. What is it? And because I think you can also say, look at it, and people have like, oh, I need this person to do this, 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 this. That's a lot. That's way too much. So what are the key priorities? Like, what are the 3 things that they must know in order to be successful? Must be able to do in order to be successful? And then focus there. And then it starts to expand. If you have somebody, though, that they can't expand beyond that, you probably haven't hired the right person. So you might have to go back to the drawing board and say, I didn't specify this very well for who I was looking for, or what the capabilities were, maybe the aptitude that you're looking for, those kind of things. Not everybody's a good fit for everything. You know that. You're in recruiting.
Yeah.
So you're not telling you something you know.
No, but that's a good point, because it's sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And it, unfortunately, sometimes it does take those mishires at the beginning to realize that and be like, oh, yes, I know right now how I can go back to the drawing board or to the talent market pool and then recruit the person that I now need, because I need this person to be able to fill in these kinds of gaps. And that makes total sense. And I want to get, like, let's say if we wanted to get really practical here, let's say we've already done the homework of identifying what is the list of skills that we need someone to do, and the list of tasks or behaviors that they have to do in order for us to get the business outcome. If you were to give like a framework or a method for somebody to design a training program around those skills, where should they start? How should they be thinking about like sequencing or structuring a training program to ensure that somebody's going to get those skills once you've done the job of identifying them?
So I have a framework that I use for everything that my teams would design and develop. Maybe, I don't know if I did when you and I worked together, but I did the last several years. And it's called Why, What, How. No, I did do that. I think I've used that for many years. Why, what, how. So if let's take a skill. So let's say the skill is, we'll just go back to project management, because there's a lot of project managers. Okay. So why is project management important? A lot of people don't think it's important, but why is it important? That's the first part of the program. So it's like, this is why it's important. We cannot meet our goals if we don't manage these things and have a timeline and have scope and scale, everything, right? And you have the triangle and all this stuff.
The art of execution in businesses, right?
Exactly. So why is it important? That's number 1. Number 2, what is project management really? Like, what is it? You're managing the timeline, you're managing the resources, right? You're managing the scope. These are the 3 things you're managing, and you're managing stakeholders. So that's really what this is when we say project management. And then the third thing is how. How do we do that? So how do we do that? So here's how we do it for how we manage the timeline. Here's how we manage the scope. Here's how we manage the resources, which includes budget. And here's how we manage our stakeholders. It's the why, what, how. So you start with why it's important, what it actually is, and then how you go about doing all these things. And then you in between, you're having, exercises and practices on, do you understand this? Test on what is the why, test on what is the what are the key pieces, and then test on the how. The thing is, that's data storytelling. Basically, that format
Mm-hmm.
is the same thing as storytelling, which is a skill that a lot of people are really bad at. So if they learn that why, what, how, they can tell a story, they can develop training, they could write a document, a memo, create content. There's lots of things you can do with that format, and
Yeah.
it applies to learning.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people, when I see the training being executed, everybody jumps directly to the how. And although it
Yes.
might sound simple, right? But like the reason why we start with the why, going back to the board game example, is like, how does this fit with like what's the objective of the game, right? In a lot of cases, all of the skills, at least in my experience, when we've trained on them, have an underlying requirement of critical thinking, right? And for
Yes.
me, the way that I connect critical thinking, or the way that I define critical thinking, is the ability to connect the dots, right? People won't be able to connect the dots that they don't know to look for, which is why they have to learn, okay, this is why it's important and how this ties to the business outcomes. And then the what is like, let us break it down into chunks so that we could tell you like what this skill is made up of and how it's constructed. And now let's tackle the how in each one of these what's, I guess. And now it's more easy to be like, oh, why do I need to know about budget, scope, timelines? I could trace that whole line of thought back to business outcome. And I think that if I just jump into the how, it's almost like jumping into a board game when no one told you the instructions. And you're like, I guess this moves the pieces forward, I guess. So it's
Yeah.
more like trial and error at that point, as opposed to like a sequence of events that
Well, and it
I,
also helps with problem solving. So, to your critical thinking, if you don't understand the objective or the reason why we're doing things, if a problem occurs when you're doing the how, the machine breaks or whatever, there's a step missed, we don't have the supplies, there's a resource out sick, then how do we know what the impact of that is going to be if we don't understand the why it's
Mhm.
important, right? So you run out of money in Monopoly, then you don't understand now what happens. So
Mhm.
you have to really have the full picture to understand, when something goes wrong, how do we fix it? And that gives you that, by doing the how and understanding what it was you were doing and why you were doing it, you've got that full data in front of you that you can work with to solve the problem. In solving problems, by the way, your Monopoly game, I always have people do jigsaw puzzles. And
Mhm.
this is always one of the questions I ask when I interview people, is whether or not they like jigsaw puzzles. And if people like jigsaw puzzles, they're usually pretty good problem solvers. If they don't
Yeah.
like them, I'm like, how do you solve problems?
Yeah, it's such a fantastic analogy because in order for you to solve a jigsaw puzzle, you need to know what the picture looks like. That's the why, right? Like
Yeah.
if you see all the pieces, you're like, I'm gonna take forever just figuring out what I'm building here. And yet I'm like doing the how part without with skipping these earlier preliminary steps. And I think that the how at that point, I'd love to hear your opinion, right? But like the how, like let's say we did the homework with the why and the what on each skill. When we're developing the how, that is highly contextual on what the skill really is, because some things you can't learn in a vacuum, some things you have to learn with role play and other people, some things is with shadowing, sometimes it's like with a sandbox environment. So that how is where like creativity comes into play. I'm imagining that there's preferred methods. I don't know if you have a thought process behind, okay, now that we know what we're doing and what's it for in the business, how do I learn project management as a skill? Like, how do I get these practice rounds versus learning sales or versus learning data entry or whatever? Is there a way to, I guess, codify that, or is it just case by case in your opinion?
Well, I think it's both, but I also think that there's a way to give practice projects. Let people dip their toe into things. They go back from the class and they say to their boss, I learned this, this, and this, and I'd really like the opportunity to do this, to try it with something real, not just the practice thing that was in the class. And that gets into another concept that I don't know if you're going to ask me about this, but is empowerment. And, a lot of times leaders don't empower their teams to actually try things. They delegate or they direct, one of the two. And they think they're empowering when they're delegating, but they're not really. I've had leaders say to me, I went on vacation, I empowered my team to take care of X, Y, and Z while I was gone, and they did it wrong. And I'm like, well, you didn't empower them. That's not empowerment. So it's like, so especially in small companies, I mean,
Sure.
this works in all companies, but I think when you have fewer resources, you have to empower people. You don't have enough time as a leader to give everyone directions on how to do everything. And this kind of gets into, what we did before together was situational leadership, right? The people are at different development levels on their different tasks, and you're going to lead them different ways. But empowerment is really saying to the individual, I want you to do, here's the outcome that I'm looking for. And I'm giving this to you. I want you to take responsibility, but I want to know, how are you going to tackle this? What are you going to do? And you have a conversation. I mean, the person could say, well, I'm going to give it to a third-party vendor. And you're like, no, wait a minute. How are we going to do this? I mean, you got to have the conversation, because if you don't have the conversation, you really are just delegating. So you need the conversation to ensure the person takes ownership and responsibility of whatever it is you're empowering them with, and then find out what are they planning to do with it. As long as they know the outcome that you're looking for, not the way you do it, but what you're looking for at the end, then you can empower them. And that's sort of the how, by the way, when we're teaching the how. So we're going to teach the how we do this here. Through critical thinking and problem solving, new ways are going to come about, right? Once they start
Even better ways.
becoming,
Right.
even better ways. And they start becoming more of an expert. They're going to come up with new ways and to be more productive. Let's do this faster. And, let's do this with fewer resources and whatnot. So I think it really drives productivity.
Yeah. And I think it's such a key term. We see it all the time because we work with founders who are getting executive assistants, and executive assistant is the name of the game is to delegate, right? That's the whole point that you got an assistant in the first place. But I couldn't recommend that situational leadership course or content enough, because a lot of the mistakes that we see is that 30 days in, they're delegating like the most important function of the business without even giving proper guidance. And when they're like stumbling and trying to figure out and they don't get it right, the knee-jerk reaction is to blame the talent, to be like, hey, this guy or this gal is not good at this job because they couldn't fulfill on this delegated task that I gave them. When in reality, they weren't in a level where you could, first of all, delegate that sort of task. And second of all, the way that you delegate it wasn't the right way either, right? Like doing those checks of like, here's the outcome. How do you think that we could get here? And let me walk you through what are some of the roadblocks that you're going to encounter. And I think that progressiveness in your approach as a leader is the wisest thing you can do when you're delegating, because not everybody is ready to receive the same instructions at the same time, right? It is a progressive approach. So for anybody out there who wants to learn a little bit more about situational leadership, we can't recommend it enough. I think it was a very enlightening way of leadership and leading through understanding where your team really is.
Well, and what you just described too, JP, is the method for how they give these assignments, or the task, if you will. Imagine the amount of learning that happens when they do it that way, when they do it the right way, right? And then the next time they get ready to give something, that person already has started to develop some skills that they didn't have before the first time. So it's like it just kind of builds on itself. Works
Correct.
out for everybody.
One of the things I wanted to ask, kind of pivoting to a different subject altogether, is part of like you being the chief learning officer of these big companies is it's almost like part of the job description to be at the forefront of all of the things or all the innovations that are surrounding learning. And one of the things that I, have been noticing analogously and also like from data is that our attention spans are shortening in a dramatic way. We have this dopamine filled world and our attention spans are like 7 seconds. And that makes it very challenging for people wanting to teach others something, or like for the traditional training that is like, look at this 30-minute video, let alone a 3-week class, right? So how do you think our progressive shortening of attention spans has changed the way that people learn at work? And what can leaders do about it to make sure that people are still learning in this new context?
Well, first off, if they don't understand why they're learning whatever they're learning, they're not going to have an attention span for it. So, like I have 2 adult kids, and I remember when my son needed to learn how to tie a tie for the prom, he went to YouTube and watched a video. Now, it was probably a 15-minute video. He would never have watched it if he didn't need to learn how to tie a tie for the prom. That's the why, right? It's like, so there has to be the reasoning behind why they're learning. And so if people don't want to, I mean, if you send someone a video, first off, I'm the worst student. So I get these videos and I'm like skipping ahead. Like, where's the part that I need to know? It's all about the why. Like, why do I have to watch all this? And so I think it's really like figuring out, what is it that they need to know, and they don't need to know all this. My daughter is a bank teller, and she was telling me she's new in her bank teller role. So a couple months in, she's gone to 3 training classes. And this last training class, she came back, she goes, Mom, they're just going through all this stuff so fast. Like, I already knew it, and this is a refresher. And I said, oh, is this supposed to be onboarding? She goes, yes, it's supposed to be onboarding. I said, this is the typical problem that training developers fall into, is they teach what they know, and they don't think about the individual at the other end that's trying to consume this information. You remember how many times I used to say, yeah, but is it consumable when we were developing stuff?
Like for the beginner's mind, right? Is it catered to them?
For the beginner's mind, exactly. And my son was really the one who changed my whole mindset. I remember when he was in school and he said, one time I told him to do something. I said, why can't you do that? He goes, because Mom, I wasn't born knowing it. And I was like, light bulb went on. And I think I said that to the team all the time.
Yeah.
Like, wasn't born knowing it. None of our employees are born knowing it. So when you hire somebody, they may have been the greatest salesperson ever at some other company. They come in, they were not born knowing how to sell in your company. They weren't born knowing your product. And so you have to make sure that, yes, they have sales skills, but you need to help them get to where they understand your product, its features and benefits, its, the things that are obstacles for clients and customers. You have to make sure that they know all that. What's your sales process, et cetera. They weren't born knowing it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we see it because like for executive assistants also, it's like you can know how to do travel planning, or you can know how to do an event plan, or you can know how to organize folders in a Google Drive with a particular naming convention, because that's how you learned it with your first executive that you work with. But like when you go into the next one, you have all those skills for a completely different person. And I think that one of the things that's a complicated step of the process for my clients is realizing you've been living inside your brain for your entire lifetime, and you're now inviting someone into it, and they're exploring that room and be like, what is all this mess, and trying to like gain their or mix their own perspective with your own. And so I think also it's a calibrating moment to be like, where are you at right now as a learner? Like, what do you know and what do you don't know? And I think that was the most frustrating part about designing training for a classroom, because in a classroom of 30 people, there were different levels of how they showed up to class. And so for some people, half of the class was boring because they knew all this stuff already. But for others, they were like just getting into this world that everything was new to them. So we had to take those steps to level everybody at the same level. The fortunate thing about small businesses is that it's just one person, right? So you at least should be doing a level set. Where are you at currently? And how can I get you the rest of the way? But don't assume you're at a level and then get frustrated when you can't get a particular task done. So I couldn't agree more. It's like I wasn't born knowing it, and that's kind of like the perspective we should all take about teaching somebody something.
Well,
You
and
know.
what you just mentioned was the context. I mean, it's
Mhm.
really establishing that context for the skill that you have. Here's a new context, and this is what it looks like. But you're right. There's an assumption made that because you have a skill, you can read my mind and know exactly how I want it, and that's not fair.
Yeah, I think one of the things we do for that is like you should have a kickoff call, and these are the questions that you can ask so that you start level setting and start, hey, I prefer window seat as opposed to aisle, and whatever, right? Like you can start getting those preferences down. One of the things I want to talk to you about is coaching. A lot of the time when we talk about or when we think about learning, we think about the initial stages of a relationship when somebody comes into a new company or is embarking in a new role. But as you mentioned, the best sort of like learning approach is that of an apprenticeship, and that coaching back and forth is so crucial to cement learning. And I also see that that's something that a lot of founders don't know how to do. So I'd love for you to tell me, like, do you think that coachability is something that everybody can have? And how should I go about it, about improving my coaching skills as a founder?
So, yeah, that's a good question. How can you go about improving? I think part of it is in the situational leadership, was definitely covered a lot of coaching, but also with managers and leaders coaching. I think one of the things is to remember to be a little empathetic. The person's learning, and they need to listen and they need to ask questions. So they need to ask, how do you think that went? That's a great question. Then it drives the other person to reflect. Well, I don't think it went that well. What do you think happened to it? What do you think went wrong? And that, well, I think I was a little too eager and I probably shouldn't have said blah, blah, blah. Okay, so that's probably right. You probably shouldn't have said that. But what could you say next time instead? Or what could you do to calm yourself down ahead of time? Or what could you do, to prepare better? These are the kind of things like really like being empathetic and asking the individual what they could do. Now there's a coaching is not like you see on TV in the NFL. That's not the type
Hmm.
of coaching. Run faster, hit it
Hmm.
harder, whatever. Throw fast, throw longer. And there are a lot of people that think coaching is that, and it's not. It's really focusing on what happened, asking the questions to help the person reflect, help the person understand, where the problem was and also what they could do differently. But you want to get their perspective. Otherwise, the coaching won't work. There's no buy-in from the individual because you're just directing. Here's what you should have done, blah, 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 blah. And then it's just kind of it's like wah 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 wah. They don't hear it. It's
Yeah.
so you didn't get anywhere with it. You wasted your time. I think the thing is that I don't know. Sometimes I think parenting is a good lead up to coaching
I was just gonna
because
say that. Yeah.
yeah, you don't want to, make your kids hate you by telling them what they do wrong all the time. So you start asking them for their opinion and how they think it should have gone better. It's coaching is really not that hard. It's really not. And there is a method to it, but it's not that hard. There are some different coaching methodologies that you can find. Like there's probably a bazillion coaching methodologies. Like what were you trying to accomplish? What was your objective? What actions did you take to do it? What'd you learn from it? Those kind of things. I mean, there's a lot of different methodologies out there, but I think if you boil it down to very practical, simple terms, it's asking how do you think it went? What do you
Hmm.
think you could have done differently? What will you do next time?
And I think that the same thing applies of starting off with the why, and it's like, hey, I want to have a conversation with you because this is a key activity in the business, and here's how it links to the bigger picture. And I think we're not there yet, but I want to have a conversation as to how we can get closer to that. And so like you're tying it to the why of the business, and you're also telling them like, hey, I want you to succeed at this. And let's start there as a baseline of how we frame this conversation. Now, knowing that I care about how you get better and how the business performs because of you. Now let's talk about like the practical stuff.
Exactly. That's
Um,
good.
I like the parenthood analogy because one of the things that I noticed, I had never heard of it until this year, which is like the whole gentle parenting.
Mm.
Right. And so like I have my opinions. I won't like bore you with them, but I also see that a lot of people are starting coaching and are starting teams in with the best intentions in mind, giving people the benefit of the doubt and like giving a lot of slack to people. I also think that going to that extreme is a little bit dangerous because you're not implementing standards in your organization. And I think there is a time and place to be a little bit more stern, especially if this isn't the first time that you've given this sort of feedback to someone. So, how do you now become a gentle parent that doesn't get the results, but at the same time don't get your kids to hate you? Like, what's an in between? And in what situations do you have to be a little bit more stern in your coaching, if at all, right?
So I don't know that I'm stern as much as reminding them we've talked about this before. And this is, this is what we remember the last time we did this, we talked about this, this, and this. We're not going to meet our goals if this continues. So
Uh,
here's how we need to focus forward. And these are at some point in coaching, it doesn't mean you never give direction. At some point in coaching, you may say, you know what? We're not going to get to our goal that way. You got to come up with another way. Let me give you a suggestion. Or can I give you a suggestion? Either or. If you want to be more stern, let me give you a suggestion. And I've done that. You know that. I did that with you, I think.
Probably multiple
But
times.
let me give you a suggestion. But I think it's you're not gonna you don't want to berate the person because they're not getting it, but you do take notes. Like you do remember, like, I don't think this person has the aptitude to get there. Like you're
Mhm.
not gonna just beat the dead horse over and over and over again. And like, I mean, I did have critics who said I gave people too many chances. I'm not gonna say their name, but you know who I'm talking about.
Right.
But I did give people chances because I wanted to see if they had other skills. So I would kind of redirect them towards maybe other skills and try that out. And then when I realized that they weren't just good, they weren't good at anything, then it was kind of time to part ways. But um,
Yeah.
I do think there is a point in time where you have to say, look, we've got this really tough customer.
Hmm.
It's a top priority. We can't take any more time on this. Like we need to get this done. So tell me, who should I get to help you? Who do you think can
Mm.
help you? Are there resources out there? A lot of times that's all it is. They want to know that, or what can I do to help you? They want to know that there is help on the horizon and they'll get there.
Yeah. I do think going back to like I give people too many chances. I think also people it's cultural, right? Because I tend to see that in the United States, things are a little bit more cutthroat in the sense of like it's not a three strike policy, it's like a one strike and you're out kind of thing. I do believe in giving people a little bit of grace. And I think it was NVIDIA's CEO. He was almost saying in a stage presentation that he would bully people into like not bully in that sense, but like I would push you and I will continue going back to you even if you're making mistakes time after time until we find success. Like I won't give up on you that easy, even though it takes a lot of my time, a lot of my energy, a lot of my effort. I will hang on to this relationship because I believe in your capabilities. And I think that that's also where your leadership comes in is yes, we're trying to accomplish this as a business and gain these results, but at the same time, you also, as a leader, have a secondary responsibility, which is building people up to whatever's next in life, whether or not that's with you, right? And if you have that philosophy, you're responsible for how people are developing. I just always have that like conflicting pull of yes, but you have to hold people to account. Otherwise, you're sending the wrong message to somebody else in
I
the team
well,
who is doing their job.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I know you have to hold people to account, and I do. I think you've heard me say this before that I expect, and I tell that one thing we didn't talk about is I set expectations for the team. Um, I always told the teams that we need to be flexible, resilient, and accountable. And if not everything's going to go the way we want. And so we have to flex. And when it doesn't go the way we want, we have to be resilient and we have to do what we say we're going to do. I mean, those three things I think are key to any high performing team. And I could expand on each one of those, but suffice it to say, I think that at least gets the point across. The other thing is you mentioned development. And I think this is a key thing, at least in my leadership style, is that I tend to develop people very fast. And the way I do it is I throw them into the deep end of the pool and I stand there on the side with the little lifesaver, but I let them try stuff. So I find things that are not as risky for them to try. And I give it to them as an assignment. And, I empower them. We talk about, what do you think you're going to do? They go off, they do their thing. And I think that I have been surprised and delighted more times by doing that than I ever was by delegating and directing. And so, and the people have told me, the individuals have told me they're working on things that they wouldn't have dreamt of working on for years because of that just technique, that small technique. And they've also told me, we understand your MO here, like you're giving us a project and we know what you're doing. You're throwing us in the deep end of the pool. I'm like, I am, but I'm not going to let you drown. I want to be here to support you. I want them to be successful.
I remember a very specific example. I think I was probably like 2 weeks into me joining the organization that you were a leader of. And we had the biggest project in the entire company history. And we had just had the project manager leading that project quit on us. And it was like a 6-month project, $250,000 worth of work. Like it was like a huge thing. And every other person was already allocated to a different project. And we were all like troubleshooting, like, what do we do here? Because we're way behind schedule. And you're like, JP should take it. And then in that meeting, I was like, I'm like super new here. I don't know if I'm feeling up to it. And then we ended the call. And then Marcy, my boss, who was your direct report, called me into an office. Is like, hey, if Michelle is giving you this project, is because she trusts you. I wouldn't shy away from an opportunity like this. I think that if she gave that to you, is because she knows that you can handle it, and she'll make sure you have the resources. But this is a very good way for not only for you to like, earn your stripes with the team, but also so that you can learn more about our business. Instead of like your learning curve taking a year, it's going to take like the 3 months that this project is worth. And I was like, all right, cool. I'll take on this project. And it catapulted my learning for about 6 to 8 months. And I think that single project or responsibility is what allowed me to get 3 promotions within 3 years inside of that team, because I understood very quickly what the team was about, what success meant. And if you were able to have in your first 3 months a huge project like that, all the other things that came after that felt like an easier task to tackle. And so I just wanted to share that because it was like one of those catalyst moments very early on where I felt like I was going to drown. This was set up for me to fail. But then it was like, oh no, this is the best thing that could have happened in my trajectory in this company. So it was a case study.
Well, you're welcome. And you got a lot of visibility from that project. And that's the other thing I think is that a lot of times leaders will block the visibility of their team members. And I've always been one who pushes people forward. And, I've gotten criticized by my manager for that, my managers in the past, because they want me to be on stage front and center. Yeah. And I'm like, no, I don't need to be front and center. I need these guys to be front and center. They're doing the work. And I want them to get that exposure and that experience. And, that gets into the ego piece of it, which I do think part of helping people learn is to set your own ego on the shelf and focus on them, right? And not focus, oh, how's this going to make me look? I have to teach them this or whatever. It's like, you know what? Who cares how it makes you look? You're going to focus on them. That is what's really most important. And if they're driving towards meeting the company goals, then isn't that what you care about? It's not about you. It's about the company. So I think that's another lesson that some leaders need to learn. Put their ego
Yeah,
on the shelf.
100%. Last thing that I want us to talk about, and I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to talk about what's next in learning. And the biggest equalizer in the world right now is artificial intelligence, right? It's giving the power back to like what the internet did before, where just factories and Fortune 500 companies could earn what they could earn. Now, like after like the internet, like it was more of an equalizer. More people had access to technology and were able to develop enterprises. Now AI is like another inflection point, and it is affecting everything that we do. And so I want to know what the impact of artificial intelligence is going to have or is having in the way that we learn, and how can founders be smart about getting ahead of the curve when it comes to implementing AI as a learning tool inside of organizations.
So, we talked before about the why, what, how.
Yeah.
And when we were talking about that, I was actually thinking about this because, and this is probably controversial, but I think the how, if we were to just focus on the how, we might as well have robots or AI, right? AI is not going to know the why or the what's on everything necessarily, right? Because the what in the context of the business that you're running or the why is so important to your particular business. AI doesn't have the critical thinking that we need. And critical thinking is like key to learning. Like without critical thinking, you really can't learn. So I think AI does give us some information that, it does take a lot of the research time away. Like when we were talking about different skills, how do you create a marketing strategy? You could easily go to ChatGPT or Claude or what's the other, Perplexity or whatever.
Perplexity.
Yeah, and ask, what are the key components of a marketing strategy? I'm doing a strategy for this, this, and this. Please give me an outline. Well, it can give you an outline, but it's not always right. And so the critical thinking, you could take the outline, that's your how. But if you know the what and the why, you can look at it and you can say, this isn't going to work for us. And here's why. It's not going to meet this objective. It doesn't include X, Y, and Z. And so I think from a learning perspective, it's going to shave some time off of the research part of it, but it's not going to replace the why and the what. The what with context. Let me just add that. The what, if it's generic, maybe, but with context, it won't. So I think it's cool. I like AI, but I'm very suspect. I use it all the time for a lot of different things. But I'm very suspect. We have arguments. Claude and I have arguments all the time. We have debates.
They're coming for you after the AI uprising, then. You're the first one on their list.
I'm like, that is wrong. That is not the way this goes. Oh yeah, thank you for correcting me. But they've done a lot of training on the AI models to teach them how to be more empathetic and more like, oh, that's such a great idea, and
Yeah.
oh, this is, and I think it's good but bad in a way because we're starting to build more confidence in it, and so we shouldn't. We should
Yeah.
be very critical and look at things that we do and make sure that it makes sense and that it really aligns with where we're trying to head.
I agree. I think that critical thinking is still the skill that we should hold on, I guess, in one of the most highest regards in our skill stack or in our skill repertoire. Because I remember when we were at, the company that we used to work together, when we introduced, it was a version of AI. They call it RPA, right? Robotic process automation. And it was like the first instances of using an automated way to solve customer problems. And from the training side, what we noticed is that when we introduced this technology, then all that was left was the hardest issues to solve, right? So before, when you had maybe an agent coasting for 80% of their time with like low ball, issues, and 20% were the hard ones, now their days were 100% the harder things to do. So it was like a very interesting truth serum that we poured in our entire workforce to see who was actually good at their job and who actually needed supplemental training. I think that that's a little bit of what's happening, where artificial intelligence is taking all the mechanical work out of our hands. And now what we have left is the harder problems, the ones that require critical thinking, piecing things together. So I still sustain that in order for you to thrive in this new world, you have to continue to develop your problem solving and critical thinking skills, being more that orchestra director. And also at the same time, you do have to become proficient at wielding these modern tools. But you can't put the what they call the horse before the chariot, right? Like you
Cart
have to
before the
start.
horse.
Yeah, the cart before the horse. Yeah, you have to start with critical thinking and problem solving and understanding what are the dots out there that you have to connect. And then, yes, now that you have context and a vision of where you need to get to, then you can select the tools that is going to take you there easier. But I always remember that AI or automation was a way for us to unearth what our deficiencies truly are as professionals and where we should actually be focusing on. Not sure if you
Absolutely.
agree, right? But like that's sort of
No,
like the interesting analogy that I've been drawing
I
from this.
I think that's a great example, and it's so if you remember, we kinda knew that was coming, and we were raising the bar on those people so that they weren't blindsided by the fact that they were gonna have to do all that once the easy stuff got handed off to robotics. But, Wharton did a study 2 years ago. I forget who they did it with, but who was their partner, but I think Boston Consulting Group maybe. They did this study on AI and what people viewed as who's the expert? Is it
Mhm.
AI or is it the actual expert? Like the expert that has a PhD and has been doing this for 35 years. They looked at and what they found is the majority of the people believed AI over the expert. That's a problem. That shows that critical thinking is diminishing. And I've read other studies that have said the same thing. So I think if people are going to be successful, that is going to be one of their superpowers. Is if they can develop critical thinking and problem solving, that becomes a superpower against their competition.
Yeah, and it also, I mean, I don't know. It feels like this like weird game sometimes of broken telephone. I don't know if you've ever played that game, but
Yeah.
like I also worry about inputs and outputs, right? Because the outputs of AI for language models, at least, is the internet, and the internet is riddled with a lot of things that may be good or maybe not. I also agree with you with the fact that AI tends to be more agreeable, right? When it comes to, giving you responses or feedback. So I am a optimist when it comes to like artificial intelligence at the same time that I'm also a skeptic, right? And kind of like the gold rush when there was a lot of like hype around something. There was like people who were legit and getting success, and other that were more, taking advantage of the hype
Mhm.
for not the
Yep.
the most honest of means, right? But yeah, I really appreciate the time. I think that that's a good note for us to close on. I do have a few lightning round questions. If you still have some time, I'd love to get your perspective on a few of these things very
Sure.
quickly.
I have
Cool.
time.
So maybe like answering these, the first thing that comes to mind. So what is the book that has most influenced you as a leader?
The four agreements.
The Four Agreements. Okay.
Yeah,
What
I still recommend that book to people all the time by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Awesome. What is one task that after you've delegated for the first time, you would never take it back again?
Oh, creating a PowerPoint.
When's the last time you created one?
Oh, I did one last year, but I didn't like it. I was like, oh my God, I would say, "Rrr."
Yeah. There's that Gamma dot app if you ever want to create presentations, just for anybody who's
Oh, okay.
listening.
Thank you. I have to
Uh,
look for
what's the
some.
most painful mistake that you've ever made when building a team?
Oh, I think choosing people that I liked over people who could actually really do the job. I
That's a
think
good
I was
one.
swayed by charisma and confidence and didn't really look at their competence as much as I should have. So, yeah.
What is one tool that you think gives you the most leverage in your day to day or gives you more time back from your day?
Wow, I can't use my phone probably, right? Does that not
It's
count?
like, no,
Hi,
probably not. Maybe
Tommy.
like a SaaS product that you've used the most to give you leverage.
Um, Gee, I don't know. I can't really answer that. Oh, since I'm retired,
Oh yeah,
um,
that's a good point.
yeah. I mean,
If
I will say that oh, there's a tool that when I do have to do a PowerPoint, do you know the tool called Sketch Bubble?
I haven't, no, I haven't heard of
They
it.
have a lot of PowerPoint templates. That gives me a lot of time back. Gives me like
Nice.
a leg up, if you will.
And last one, if you can leave any founder who's listening to this, what is one rule about scaling smarter, your company smarter? What would that rule be?
What rule? Well, I think the rule is focus on the skills that are going to help your company be successful. Less on the individual, but more on the skills, what skills you need, and then find the people that have those skills. And if they have to be tweaked for your company, tweak them. But I think that's really the focus. I mean, don't hire all your family members. And um, that would be one of my lessons. So but really focus on the skills. And I'm going to add one more thing because this isn't really for scaling, but I think this is just for overall leading, regardless of if you're in a small company, large company, what. But as I always tell people, is lean on the side of compassion. When people are learning, it takes time. They can't go to a class and come back and be an expert. So lean on the side of compassion when things don't go the way you thought it was going to go.
I love that. I think that's a great way to end this conversation. So, Michelle, thank you so much for your time. I know you're retired, but where can people find you? Or if they want to learn a lot more from you, is there a channel that you'd like to direct them to?
Well, so there's LinkedIn, and I check LinkedIn not as often as I used to, but I do check it a few times a week. And then I do have a podcast called the Learning Imperative Podcast that is on Spotify and Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. And we talk about all sorts of interesting things there about from different authors and different corporate leaders and whatnot. So it's a lot of fun. It's, learning over coffee, basically.
Awesome. We'll include all those links to the show notes. Hopefully, you get a lot more listeners. I've had the pleasure of listening to a few of the episodes, and I've always learned from them. So, thank you so much for putting that content out there. And thank you so much for joining us here today, and hope to have you back at some point in the future.
Well, this was absolutely my pleasure, and I would be happy to come back.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle.
So there you have it, everyone. As I mentioned in the intro, I have learned a ton from Michelle over my career, and she has really shaped the way that I think about learning and development. So I hope you were able to pick up on a little bit of wisdom from her in this episode. I will link her LinkedIn as well as her podcast, The Learning Imperative, in the show notes so that you can continue learning from her. So if you're focused on building high-performing teams, be sure to follow our show because we're posting every week around concepts of hiring, training, managing, and growing talent so your business can grow and scale faster. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.